Everybody, my name is Vidi and I'm going to explain how the urinary system works and how we produce urine. But first I want to go over our anatomical structure of the kidneys. So I'm going to start from the superficial to deep side of the kidneys. So we have our renal capsule, our renal cortex where our nephrons are located, our renal column where blood vessels travel, and then we have the renal medulla. Let me get a little closer. The renal medulla. And then these black lines right here I drew, let me go to this one. This is the renal pyramids. If I get a little closer, you can see the renal papilla, the minor calyx, the major calyx, and then the renal pelvis. This dotted line right here is the renal hilum, which is basically the entryway for the vessels. And then I have, here, let me zoom out. Okay, that's better. And here is the renal vein, the renal artery, and the ureter, which travels down to the bladder, and then the urethra for excretion of urine. In this section right here, I'm going to go over the arteries and veins, and we're going to go by the flow of blood. So here we have the renal artery. Get a little closer. We have the segmental artery, interlobar, arcuate, and the cortical radiate arteries. And then we go into the afferent arteriole and into the glomerulus. And then we're going to go through the exit route of the glomerulus, which is going to begin with the efferent arteriole, the peritubular capillaries, the cortical radiate vein, which is also known as the interlobular, and then we have the arcuate vein, interlobar, the renal vein, and then we'd go to the IVC, which is the inferior vena cava up into the heart. All right, so here we have our nephron, and the bulbous side of the nephron is called the renal corpuscle, while the tube side is called the renal tubule. All right, so for the nephron, there are approximately 1 million nephrons per kidney, so we have approximately 2 million per person or human. Its function is to filter blood and create urine. There are two types of nephrons. We have the cortical nephron, which makes up 80% of the nephrons, and it does have a short nephron loop and produces the majority of your urine. We also have the juxtamedullary nephron, which makes up 20% of the nephrons, and it does have a loop that extends into the medulla. Its job is to maintain proper sodium levels and water balance in the body. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the flow of blood first, which is going to come from the afferent arteriole into the glomerulus, which is housed by the Bowman's capsule. And this is a network. The glomerulus is a network of capillaries that's going to, it's fenestrated. So it is going to act as a strainer where it will filter out small solutes or smaller particles, and the bigger particles like red blood cells and proteins like albumin will remain in the bloodstream. These smaller solutes are going to move from the Bowman's capsule and into the proximal convoluted tubule, which we can refer to as the PCT. The PCT is the longest tubule, and it does contain the most coils. It is responsible for the majority of reabsorption, and the PCT does have an abundance in microvilli to increase surface area for reabsorption, and also mitochondria to provide the energy needed for active transport of those solutes. The solutes that the PCT will be reabsorbing is sodium, glucose, amino acids, and other ions. And also water will follow passively by osmosis, because water does follow salts or solutes, and these will be reabsorbed into the bloodstream. If you could see these peritubular capillaries, that's where those solutes will be reabsorbed. Now that we covered the PCT, we're going to go over the loop of Henle. So the loop of Henle has the descending limb and the ascending limb. The descending limb reabsorbs water by osmosis through aquaporins due to the salinity of the medulla's tissue. And the ascending limb reabsorbs ions like sodium, potassium, chloride, and it is impermeable to water. So basically what happens is the descending limb lets water out, and the ascending limb lets salts out. The water, salts. And both will be reabsorbed into the bloodstream by the vasa recta. And that's those capillaries with the blood, the arteries, and the veins. The vasa recta will be the capillaries that surround the loop of Henle. So filtrate follows down the loop of Henle and into the DCT. And the DCT is hormonally regulated. So aldosterone acts to increase sodium reabsorption and potassium secretion, which helps raise blood pressure and maintain electrolyte balance. Now I'm going to explain how this works. So we have a system called RAS, where the liver releases angiotensinogen, which is always floating around in the blood. Kidneys detect low blood pressure and release renin, which is an enzyme. Renin converts angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. The lungs release ACE, which is a angiotensin converting enzyme, and converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is a potent vasoconstrictor, so it constricts the blood vessels and increases blood pressure. And as well, angiotensin 2 will also stimulate the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone, which signals the kidneys to retain salt and thus retain water. And this increases blood volume. And so the increase in blood volume and the increase in blood pressure stabilize bringing the low blood pressure back to normal blood pressure levels. I do also want to mention that aldosterone acts on the DCT where it reabsorbs, or excuse me, it secretes hydrogen ions when blood is too acidic. So if your pH levels are low and acidic, the DCT will secrete hydrogen ions to bring back those pH levels to normal. So Filtrate now moves from the DCT into the collecting ducts. The collecting ducts are controlled by ADH, which increases the duct's permeability to water. When ADH is present, aquaporins open and water is pulled out of the collecting duct by the salinity of the medulla, by the salty medulla. And this concentrates the urine even further. And then when ADH is low, the ducts stay less permeable and more water is eliminated, producing dilute urine. From there, urine flows from the collecting ducts down into the papillary ducts, the minor calyx, the major calyx, the renal pelvis, the ureter, the bladder, and finally the urethra, where urine is excreted. Last thing I forgot to mention in regards to ANP, or atrial natriuretic peptide. Atrial natriuretic peptide is a hormone that is released by the heart in the event of high blood pressure. So what happens is that ANP will trigger the kidneys to secrete more salt, and water follows salt, so in that sense it'll also be secreting or excreting more urine. And we know that less blood volume means lower blood pressure. So in the event of high blood pressure, that's what's going on in the body. ANP is a hormone released by the heart, signals the kidneys to release sodium and water, and brings the blood pressure levels back to normal. Oh, and then I also forgot to mention that humans produce 150 to 180 liters of filtrate per day. However, we only secrete 1 to 2 liters per day. So that's a lot of filtration happening in our body. And yeah, it's pretty awesome. Anyway, that's it for the urinary system.